Presentation aids. Things you do to add to your speech. They don't just add to your speech. They can make your speech more interesting, easier to listen to, easier to remember. There are a lot of advantages to them. We're going to talk about some of those right now. For instance, helping your audience understand. Sometimes a graph can make a bunch of numbers totally clear. If you've got a series of numbers and you're showing a trend, give us a graph. Or if you're talking about art, visual art, a picture is worth 1,000 words, at least in the context of talking about art. Don't describe a painting to us, show it to us. If you want to talk about, I don't know, the parts of a newspaper, I could hold up a newspaper here and point to the various parts of the newspaper. And that's a presentation aid. It's just something besides yourself that you're using to help your audience understand. Or you can help them remember. For instance, if I'm talking about plastic waste, I keep talking about plastic waste, and people are kind of like, oh yeah, there's a lot of plastic in the world. And then I hold up this water bottle again, and I talk about plastic waste. Helps your audience remember you're talking about real things in real time that people use every day. And even when they leave your speech, when they hear the phrase plastic waste, they're going to think about that water bottle. It's going to be a little more real for them. It'll help them remember. And finally, yes, presentation aids can help hold your audience's attention. Let's get real. Sometimes there are parts of speeches that are just boring. You just have to get through them. And no matter what you do, you can't make that interesting. Well, maybe that's time for a little razzle-dazzle. Maybe that's time to pop something unexpected up. Maybe that's time to, I don't know, do something different with a presentation aid. But it has to be related to your speech. And as much as that got your attention, that really doesn't help my speech very much. Some basic guidelines for all presentation aids. Very simply, show them when you need them and hide them when you don't. This goes for everything. If I leave this water bottle here, I say plastic waste like a water bottle, and I leave it here, it's a distraction. Maybe you're watching it shake a little bit. Maybe you're wondering if I'm going to take a drink out of it. But rather than concentrate on the speaker, people will look at the water bottle. So when you're finished with it, make it go away. Put it under the table, cover it up, make it so it's not distracting. It also needs to be big enough to be seen by everybody. In a public speaking situation, you have a bunch of people sitting in front of you probably, or in a big circle around you, or however they're arranged. But there are no cheap seats in a speech. There are no seats that are better or worse. It's not like a theater. It's a public speaking situation. So the people in the back should have as good a view of what you're talking about as the people in the front. So don't do little tiny things. Make them big, make them clear, make sure that everybody can see them. If you're sitting in a circle, move them around so everybody gets a clear view in the circle of what you're talking about. And keep them simple. Going back to graphs again. You could plot, I don't know, anything practically on a daily basis. Point after point every day for a year, you'd have 365 points. But that's confusing. If all you need on that graph is to talk about weekly changes, then simplify it. Maybe if you want to do a speech about grooming your dog, maybe bringing your actual dog is a little too complicated. Maybe bringing a stuffed toy dog is going to make it a lot simpler for the audience to get what you're talking about. So think about simplifying things. And you've probably heard this one, but face the audience. You've got something going on behind you. Turn your head and look at it. But don't put your back to the audience. Make sure you face them. The minute you turn and look at whatever's behind you, you become part of the audience. You're not the speaker anymore, because you're looking at what becomes the speaker, even if that's a slideshow, even if that's, I don't know, a buzzsaw. The minute you turn your back to the audience, you're not the speaker. And like I said at the beginning of the course, you want to keep control of the situation. So don't turn your back to the audience, and practice with them. Don't assume that it's going to work out the way you have it in your head. It's not going to, any more than the speech itself will. So if you're using presentation aids, practice with them before you get there. You'll find glitches, you'll find problems, you'll find adaptations you need to make, and you'll be much more comfortable when it comes to using them. So that's all presentation aids. Let's talk about some in particular. Oh, sorry, you didn't want to see them again, did you? Okay, non-electronic, non-digital stuff. Just some tips and tricks about these items. First of all, handouts. Don't hand out a handout right before you speak. People will read it. If it's in front of them, they'll read it again. If I laid a piece of paper in front of you right now, you would read it. If you're going to do handouts, either hand them out like they do in church services way before the service begins, so everybody has a chance to look at it, read it through, knows what's in it, or hand it out afterwards. But unless, and one exception here, unless you're going to go through it point by point, you're going to talk about every item in it. So you want people to look at it. Don't hand out handouts during your speech. I just told you not to turn your back to the audience. Whiteboards, chalkboards are tricky. And I wish I had one here that I could show you how all this works. But if you just need to put something quick on a whiteboard, turn right on the whiteboard, don't say anything, write fast, and turn back around to your audience. They'll zone out a little bit while you're writing, or they'll focus on your writing. That's fine. At least you didn't say anything they needed to hear in that stretch. This gets more complicated when you have a lot of things to put on a whiteboard. And you've probably seen, I don't know, math teachers who end up turning to the board and writing their formulae on the board, and it's as if they're talking to themselves. And once they do that, they really lose your attention. If you've got to do something like that, and this is for those of you who are going to be math teachers, if you've got to turn to a board and write something that's going to take you some time, okay, go ahead and read it to the group behind you, but get loud. Louder than you need to be. This will signal to the audience that you're still talking to them, and it'll get you through it. So for instance, let's say the professor is writing on the board, da, 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 da. and they want to explain this. Now, they can do it the way I'm afraid math teachers still do it. You know, they'll write, let's say, x squared plus y squared equals 16z. They'll write that on the board. And they're talking to themselves. How to change that up. Turn back to the board. Talk a little louder. All right, so x squared plus y squared equals 16z. And just by talking a little bit louder, like I said, your audience will pay attention. And models versus objects. I'm kind of hinted at this before when I talked about bringing your dog. Very often, the object itself is too complicated, too out of control to use in a speech. If you have a model of it, a mock-up, a stuffed toy, whatever, and it's big enough for everybody to see, that may be a better choice than the thing itself. The thing itself can be very complicated. I watched a student once try to explain how to build your own computer, had all the parts, and tried to put them all together in a 7-minute speech. It didn't work. And I'm not sure if that speech could have worked, but it would have worked much better if he simply had fake parts, one, that were big enough to be seen, and two, that were simple enough that we could see, and maybe use some color contrast, how they went together. Finally, volunteers and assistants. These are people who are presentation aides. Okay? A volunteer is somebody you call on. They don't have any particular skills. They're just there to show how a beginner does something, whether you're going to show them a beginning tap dance or you're going to ask them to hold something, I don't know. If you're going to use volunteers, make sure you have someone in the audience who's willing to volunteer for you. Because it's entirely possible nobody's going to volunteer and then you're stuck. I had a student once, actually more than once now, so I'm just going to tell you straight out. They tried to do a speech on CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. You know what it is, right? Where you push on people's chests to bring them back. They didn't have a dummy to work on. They asked for volunteers. I can guarantee you nobody was ready to volunteer for that. And their speech bombed. It just nosedived. There was nothing, they couldn't do anything. They started trying to push on the air so we'd get the feel of it. It didn't work. If they didn't have a dummy or a better choice than that, they should have done something else for a speech. Now, assistants are also people, but these are people who are trained. These are people who have some knowledge that they're going to help you present. For instance, if you want to demonstrate how to tap dance, go back to that. Maybe you don't want to do the tap dancing yourself. Maybe you don't want to do it because you tried it and you're too winded and you've lost focus by the time you've done a little bit of it, that you can't get back to the speech without gasping and trying to figure out what you're saying next. If that's the case, you need an assistant. Ask somebody from a tap dancing class to help you. They will, but rehearse with them. Okay? They need to know that while you're speaking, they're off to the side and they should be looking at you, so they're focusing everyone else's attention on you. They shouldn't be looking at the audience between whatever they're doing. They need to look at you. They need to know where to stand. They need to know what your cues are going to be for them to get ready. So Maria is going to show us, I I don't know, a step, you say. And Maria will be ready to do that step because you've rehearsed with her. So, and there are other tips. Most of them are common sense. The idea here is with any presentation aid, it shouldn't overwhelm the speech on the one hand, and yet it should add to the speech without diminishing your presentation as much as possible. Now let's talk a little bit about electronic stuff. Electronic stuff. First of all, trim. Audio or visual stuff, trim off the sloppy beginning and the sloppy end. If I were doing these videos professionally, I would have an opening slide and an ending slide on each of these. At least that much. If you have audio involved, you want to set levels so that you're not jacking up the volume, bringing the volume back down. You have a pretty good idea before the audience comes in that it needs to be set at 4. So you just need to adjust it a little bit. Also, start at, when you want your video or your audio to start at the point you need. Don't skip through it looking for the starting moment. Go ahead, if you're using, I don't know, if you're referring to a song in CD, old-fashioned CD, pull the one song, put it on a disk drive, or not a disk drive, but a thumb drive, so that it's there, and you hit the button and it goes. You don't have to skip around looking for stuff. And practice with the equipment. Know where the buttons are. Know where not just the start button is, but the adjustment buttons are. Practice with the equipment you're going to use. If that means going into the space early and running the equipment, then do that. It's also possible that someone is going to help you with the equipment. And that takes some preparation too. They're going to need to know when to make the changes, when to show it, when to take it away, when to move to the next whatever. If it's electronic, you're going to want to give them what's called a cue sheet, a list of what's going to happen in what order, and what they call cues, a little phrase that you're going to use that says, get ready for this one. And you need to use those phrases, so they need to be in your notes. Next up, we'll be talking about polka dancing. And if this goes really well, the person running the equipment for you knows that at that moment, they hit the polka music. And it becomes a beautiful flow. And next up, we have polka dancing. And then we hear polka music. Oh, great. Run it professionally and get that in there. A small thing about electronic stuff, and maybe the stuff before, I said work with it. I have seen people bring in equipment and they didn't have the extension cords they needed. Be aware of that. I mean, maybe you want to just grab a long extension cord before your speech, throw it in the back of your car, just to have it. The next slide. And here, some notes on slides. I have a love-hate relationship with slides. I find them hugely distracting here and in a regular speaking situation. They are a big, shiny thing that is practically designed to distract from me. And if this is a speech, then the speech should be what I'm talking about, not the slides. You'll notice that my slides are designed, and this is a design concept, to use bullet points that don't explain themselves. That's to force you to listen. I have something up here called special keys. You don't know what I'm talking about yet. So it makes no sense to you until I explain special keys. Please don't put everything you're going to say on a slide. I would suggest don't put enough that the audience knows what you're talking about if you're not going to, if you weren't talking about it. Keep it brief, use it to help people understand and remember, but don't give away everything on your slides. Now, by special keys, what I'm talking about, and I don't think it'll work here on Zoom. No, it won't. Okay. But if you want a slide to go away, hit the B key. If you hit the B key, the screen will go to black. If you hit the W key, it'll go to a white light, and you can bring it back by hitting any key. So when I say take it away when you're not talking about it, bring it back when you are, you can do that with slides too. Slide transitions. Be careful with these. Oftentimes they become more interesting than the slide itself. They sometimes break and don't work like you expect them to. Keep them consistent. Use the same transition throughout a set of slides. You don't need to get fancy with it. Slides don't need to spin out or spin in. They don't need to spin in one time and come in cubes the next time. If you're going to use transitions, keep them simple. Don't let them steal attention from what you're talking about. And yes, I know all slide building programs, PowerPoint and all the rest of them, have the option for you to time your slide so it moves by itself. Don't do that. It gives you no chance to change what you're going to say depending on the audience. That gives you no chance to adjust to the people in front of you. You are then controlled by the pacing on your own slides. So don't use the timing thing. That's only useful if you are packaging a slideshow with a recording to send to somebody else. If you are live and there, by all means, do your own timing, hit the next button yourself when you're ready to move. And finally, I think this is the key, training versus learning. When it comes to slides, I think they're exceptionally good for training people. If you want people to understand what to do in the event the fire alarm goes off, 1, get up and get your stuff. 2, proceed in an orderly manner to the door. 3, turn right and head to the exit. 4, meet in the parking lot. That's training. Step-by-step training. Put it on a slide and people will remember it. Okay? Put it on a slide with some pictures, they'll remember it even better. And slides work very well for training. I'm not sure they work so well for learning because they are a distraction. And by learning, I mean you're supposed to be thinking. And I'm pretty sure when slides come up, you stop listening, the first thing you do is you write down the slide. And you've missed everything I just said. In the classroom, I try to wait and give people time to write down the slides. I've tried it here on recordings. It doesn't work the same way. It sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm just sitting there stupidly. So unfortunately, you have to write these down as I talk, or you just give up listening to what I'm talking to. But If I want you to think about something, slides don't really help with that. If I want you to think, how does this fit into everything else we've learned about speeches? If I want you to think, does this make sense or does it not make sense? If I want you to ask yourselves questions about it. Slides are a real distraction from that. People tend to think that once it's on a slide, that's all they need to know. And as much as I design my slides that you really do have to take notes, I think, to understand what's on them, there are still folks who think, oh, I'll remember that if I go back over the slides. And then you don't. So that's what I mean when I say I have a love-hate relationship with slides. I really do. Finally, when it comes to, see, isn't that distracting? You're going to read that now, aren't you? There. You read it. When it comes to presentation aids, just assume they're going to go wrong. Allow for failure. Things are going to be messed up. They will be. And if they're not, you're lucky. But particular electronic stuff, but even mechanical stuff messes up. I once did a training session with slides for a group. I'd done it before for the same group, same organization, different group of people. And I had to borrow a projector to do this from my friend Mo, who was part of the group. I did it the first time. Second time, I made arrangements with Mo. Can we borrow that projector again? He said, sure, no problem. Okay, we're good. As I arrive, I'm getting there, and I've got my thumb drive with my slides on it. Mo comes up to me and says, Leslie, I'm so sorry. My son needed to use the projector, and he's my son, so I let him have it. One thing you should know about slides, or any audiovisual aid, if, as I said at the beginning of this, it needs to be necessary, if you don't have it, you've got a problem. And I'm sitting there, and this is particularly true with slides, I'm sitting there going, Mo, come on, man, I cannot do this training without a projector. But I couldn't say that to him because he was just loaning it, and it was his son who wanted it, and I just wish he'd given me a couple days notice, but he hadn't, and here we are. Luckily, I had printed out a set of slide handouts. I usually do. You know, there's sheets of paper that have a picture of the slide and then have some notes, or, you know, sometimes they're just the slides, whatever. But I had pictures of the slides. I had one set of those. And I said to Mo, go down to the copy shop, take these with you, and make 30 copies so that everybody has them. And we were able to go on with the training. Prepare for failure. Know what you're going to do if something doesn't work, because chances are pretty good it won't. Just saying. Again, let slides add to your speech, but not take over. Handle them in a way that's not distracting. Rehearse with them, and have a plan if things go terribly wrong. Presentation aids. Thank you.